Here we have Pac-Man on the NES, a fairly unheard of game released by Namco in 1980 to the arcades. You know, I never really hear people talk about this game at all, which is a shame because it's an excellent game. Maybe they'll make a sequel one day. Maybe they can put a bow on him and call him Miss Pac-Man. I bet they haven't figured that one out yet. Alright, in all seriousness, Pac-Man is a universally acclaimed game that has sold super well since its release, and has appeared on just about anything you can put your mind to. The key to Pac-Man's success lies solely in its simplicity. A yellow circle eats smaller yellow circles and gets chased by semicircular ghosts through a maze. If the yellow circle eats a bigger yellow circle that is bigger than the small yellow circles the yellow circle eats, then the yellow circle can eat the semicircular ghosts. Alright, did you get all of that? At the end of the day, it just comes down to circles. And who knew that a game with this much geometry could be such fun? And who knew that someone like myself could be so poor at it? Yeah, as much as I'd like to pass myself off as a professional video game reviewer, I am absolutely terrible at Pac-Man, or really any simple game that exists. I'd call myself simple-minded, but I feel like that's misleading. At any rate, I can tell you for sure that getting enjoyment out of Pac-Man is not limited to ability, because while I do suck at this game, I can still squeeze a lot of fun out of it. And Pac-Man on the NES was the best version of the game you could play at home at the time. This version was released in 1984 on the Famicom by Tengen, then ported to NES a year later or so by the same brand. The version I am playing now is actually a later release produced by Namco themselves, but the two versions are practically identical to one another. The gameplay on NES Pac-Man is just what you would get in the arcade. The obvious differences here is screen orientation and control. Pac-Man on the NES has the maze in full on the screen at once on the left-hand side, with your life counter and scoring on the right-hand side. An obvious leap forward from the awful Pac-Man port on the Atari 2600, which covered the entire 4x3 screen. The controls, however, can be a mixed bag depending on your feel. The D-pad works in great effect for Pac-Man's gameplay, though it can be a bit awkward for the fast movements needed after a few levels. You'll certainly get your thumb exercise with this game. Pac-Man is truly enjoyed with a joystick, so break out your NES Advantage if you have one laying around, if you want to have a better feel while playing. But really, you shouldn't worry about feel, because this is not a version of Pac-Man that you want to stick to. That's not to say that it's a terrible version, which it absolutely is not. Pac-Man on the NES does what it set out to do in impressive fashion for 1984 standards. The obvious factor here is that it's 2021 as of this recording, nearly 41 years since Pac-Man's release to the arcades. Pac-Man can be played on numerous devices out there, offering a one-to-one arcade port with the best sound and possibly control you could want in a Pac-Man game. NES Pac-Man is more so a novelty than anything, and really only should be picked up if you're looking to complete an NES collection. But what is stunning about NES Pac-Man is that it still lives on in the 21st century, with toy arcade cabinets and handhelds still using this exact version for those systems. I still think that it's mind-blowing that a seemingly inferior version of Pac-Man is still being sold in stores, albeit on small LCD screens that can't really support much else. In the end though, Pac-Man on the NES is a great game for its time, but not the ideal way to play Pac-Man in the 21st century. I know that this is an obvious point to be made, but given how much retro gaming has exploded in popularity in the last 5 years, maybe it's worth mentioning. The reality of it is that I got bored this week and really needed something to play, and I find it hard to be bored of playing the classics.